Seems fair to me. Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make it.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook, kind of the last of summer, if you consider Labor Day marking the kind of unofficial end of summer. We have a great program coming your way, but first let's meet the panelists, starting with Wendy Weiss, the media veteran from the Big 550 KTRS. Bill McClellan from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and STLtoday.com. Also from the Big 550 KTRS and the Riverfront Times, Mr. Ray Hartman. And from STLmag.com, the St. Louis American, Big 590 and 97.1, Alvin Reed with the biggest business card in town. Hey, Ray, it was it was a bad weekend, one of the worst we've had in a long time. After last week's program, 3 kids were killed in the city of St. Louis. In addition to that, a state trooper in Illinois. Lots of gun violence. St. Louis, unfortunately, has been making the news again nationally for its violence. But here we have, I believe, 14 kids this summer gunned down in the city of St. Louis alone. And among other things, there is going to be a special session in Jefferson City, kind of take a look at sales taxes and automobiles. But it's been announced that gun violence in the state's largest city will not be on the docket. What do you think?
It's unbelievable. It's really outrageous. I don't know what words you want to use. It just shows where the priorities are. Obviously, everybody seems to need to play to the rural, part of the rural-urban split. I'm not sure why. I mean, I feel like people in the metropolitan areas are not hostile to rural people, but the idea that they need a special session to fix some mistake they made at taxpayers' expense, basically, for used car sales, so pales against the epidemic of violence in the major cities, not just St. Louis, but I'm sure Kansas City would feel the same way. It just shows misplaced priorities, and it's a really sad commentary about Missouri.
Well, I'm going to put myself in the place of the governor, which I'd like to do, permanently. But I'm going to be devil's advocate here. What would happen at a special session that you already don't know the outcome of? Now, he should have just been honest and said we're not going to do it because the votes or the voice that you think you might get because of the terrible things that are going on in St. Louis doesn't exist. So I'm not going to call everybody together for that so everybody can make speeches and pontificate about violence and guns where we already know it's not going to go anywhere. So I understand the need to do something, but I don't know that a special session, and by the way, it's not just St. Louis, a lot of the Kansas City legislatures want to do the same thing too.
Right.
But, and I'm not saying do nothing, but what would a special session do that would actually lead to any type of action from the state?
Well, the one thing I don't know what the outcome would be. The issue needs to not be about NRA versus this or whatever. It needs to be about conservative principles of limited government and government closest to home. And I'd like to see that the conservatives at least have to answer the so-called folks that call themselves conservative small government people, explain why Jefferson City should dictate to whether it's St. Louis and Kansas City or any other community, what their local policies, because gun issues are very different in a city like St. Louis or Kansas City than they are in Poplar Bluff or in Columbia or whatever, and have a little respect for the principles that you espouse about government close to home.
And what's interesting is, though, that you just said, I'm not sure what good could come of it or what answers would be found, and that is exactly what Governor Parson said. And to your point, Alvin, when Steve Roberts was talking about now is the time for leadership, now is the time for consensus building, we are so far past consensus building. This is a time for action. And I'm not sure what that looks like either. But to say, to give anything the same sort of sound as one of our infamous blue ribbon panels when little children are dying while they're waiting for a pickup or, a carry-out order with their families after a football game at Soldan. It's over. It's over. No more consensus.
I agree with that. I think the optics are terrible. I think that it shows a lack of concern just not to get people around and at least talk about it. But it's not as if our leaders in St. Louis have been on top of this issue since the homicides started to spike around 2014. And they really jumped, from the low 100s to around 200 every year. And what did we do after Michael Brown? We tried to keep Stan Kroenke in town, offering him $1 billion stadium or something. We rejuvenated the Arch. We had 2 big measures for an MLS team. One of them was a big tax increase, spend lots of money. I don't recall I don't remember a lot of attention on the local level to fight homicide among the people in this area.
Well, I couldn't put my finger on anything exact that was targeted to high crime areas, especially young people being killed. And it's so serious that I'm not saying this in a slight, but the bandwagon jumping right now is because there's a crisis. But our peoples in the city of St. Louis, if their heart wasn't in it before, 3 months from now, let's say no kids get killed for 3 months. Now it's back on the back burner again. Nobody's talking about it.
Well, that's too bad, and it would indicate that there's no leadership, and maybe there isn't.
Well,
but, it's been pointed out that we had a pretty effective program called Weed and Seed, and it was defunded around 2012. And I just don't remember people in the past 8-9 years saying, hey, we got to get the money locally for Weed and Seed because it's a great anti-violence program.
Well, you have the murders of children, Charlie, and then you'll have a brief outburst. There'll be a balloon release, and I've been to plenty of them, and people talking about this is the last one, let it stop here. And then, a couple months later, there's another one. I wish I had an answer.
Well, and I'm the same way, but I may not have, if I may have misstated, I think it's worth having this discussed in the session,
sure, me too.
even if it doesn't have the outcome. In other words, I'm for discussing it, and if people don't want to hear it.
At the same time, though, some kind of action is being taken.
And I agree with you. We have to. This has gotten to the point, and I don't remember this having as direct effects so often on kids as it did in the past. And I agree with every word you said about the fact that we have not had anybody make this. Everybody says the same platitudes and same, kind of the express prayers and thoughts and prayers. But we really haven't had anything with near the passion we have about stadium issues.
Real quick, back in 1996, James Clark, who is now at Better Family Life, very celebrated about his anti-violence programs, what he's doing now. He worked for Mayor Bosley. He had a cell phone, which was kind of a cool and new thing there. He was on it all the time, made a lot of cell phone calls. He said, I'm speaking to gang members. I'm speaking to youths in the middle of the night and all that. That was used to defeat Mayor Bosley by Clarence Harmon. That became a political issue like, oh, no, there's cell phones, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. Wow. 25 years ago, he recognized the problem, and he was espousing what he was doing about it, and it got laughed at, and it got Bosley, elected out of office. Here we are 25 years later, and I say nothing has changed.
If this were a virus, if this were an airborne virus, the EPA would be here in moon suits on every single corner. I don't care if you have to put, I think we're all at this point right now. There was all that talk after Michael Brown and about the militarization of the police. Put a tank. Put a member of the Mossad on every corner. Do whatever you have to do to stop this. This is inexcusable.
I agree. I think we learned in Ferguson, though, that the militarization in a neighborhood kind of agitates individuals. And as much as I respect Brandon Bosley,
I think the death of a child would agitate me a lot more.
But once again, I always say, let's drop Ferguson from the vocabulary.
Okay,
because what's going on in the city of St. Louis right now has nothing.
No, I agree. And the point I was making, when there was armor in Ferguson, it upset people. And we have seen homicides decrease in places like Oakland and Boston without the National Guard. And I respect Brandon Bosley. He's worked on this hard. But I think you can do it without bringing in the military. The military is good for floods, it's good for protecting the country, but I don't think it's good for patrolling the streets.
And you do have to talk about dealing with the causes, too. I mean, you've got to talk about, you know, if there was the same passion for building community centers, for kids to have something to do after, as there was for, again, stadium issues. There are things that work, whether it's community policing, community centers, obviously education issues. Those are part of the solution that you can't overlook.
To Shira Jones, our shadow mayor, you know, the city treasurer, had an excellent column in the St. Louis American about that very point, about there are programs. And, you know, I think we ought to try all of them. I read her column and I thought, these are good points, and none of these are going to eradicate violence.
It's part of the solution.
It's doing something.
Right, it's part of the
better than
solution.
balloon releases.
Right.
Well, what do you think, Bill, about the $25,000 reward that was offered by Rex Sinquefield and his wife Jean this past week in exchange for any information leading to the arrest and perhaps, I guess, a conviction of someone responsible for these youth murders?
Well, I guess their hearts are in the right place, but I found it kind of bizarre. I mean, first it was a limited time offer. I've never heard that. I mean, a reward is supposed to sit out there and let the conspirators or people who know something think about it. And this idea of a limited time offer right now, step forward. I thought, that's crazy. But I mean, you know, on the other hand, if it helps somebody come forward, it's insulting to think that these children being killed, that the community needs $25,000 to come forward, but maybe they do. But I found the whole thing strange.
And look, maybe Rex was only asked for $25,000. However, if you took my value, our family's value, all right, and compared it to Rex's, this would be the equivalent of somebody probably asking me for 11 cents for reward money. Yeah. I mean, even if they just asked for $25,000, don't you raise that ante and say, like, this is too important an issue and I have plenty of money because I'm spending it on trying to sell the airport and I'm trying to get better together and I'm millions and millions of dollars, but I got $25K for this?
Well, as a matter of fact, we know he gave $700,000 to Steve Stenger, and he spends hundreds of thousands of dollars every month for consultants who are looking into the privatization of Lambert Field.
Well, you know what?
And Better Together, not to mention what, and it's very easy for me to sit here and spend Rex Sinquefield's money, and I understand that, and God bless him for giving the $25,000. If I were the person making the ask, I would have held out a much bigger cup. That's all I'm saying.
I'm actually fine with Rex's $25,000,
well,
but I kind of had the same reaction Bill did when I thought, well, what is it if it was like September 1st?
Well, there's a sense of urgency.
No,
I mean,
I get that,
yeah.
but I mean, I thought I was surprised by that part, but I think, you know what, anybody, however much money they've got for however they come about it, anybody that's willing to put up some money that says a reward, I'm not going to criticize them. I think it's fine.
Well, Alvin, what do you think? The St. Louis American has said that some of the leaders have been sluggish in their response. Mayor Cruson says that she's in favor now of spending some money on what's called Cure Violence, which is an out-of-town group that's primarily involved in what's called street intervention, kind of like what James Clark is doing at Better Family Life. And Congressman Lacey Clay on Wednesday had a town hall meeting involving community leaders. Is this all appropriate? A little late? What do you think?
Well, you know, I think it's never too late. However, like this, any interventions that you can bring in on the street at the street level, that's what we need to do. But I mean, it just seems like it's just a whole lot of talk. And from my understanding, I was not able to go to the town hall, you know, with Congressman Clay's last night. For reading, it was very emotional. It was very emotional. People sharing their stories and their emotion and on and on. That's fine. That's great. Get it all out. Emotion isn't going to solve the problem. I mean, you know, being emotional is not going to solve this problem. It's going to take some actual, you know, physical and mental, you know, like getting the job done. And until the city really signs off on that from the mayor's office, you know, the circuit attorney, the board of aldermen, everybody, where they just come together and say, like, hey, you know, we may not have the money for this or we may not have the money for that, but we're going to have the money to start eradicating this problem. We've just got to find it.
I think any injustice, the reaction to any injustice is going to be emotional. So there's going to be that period, especially in today's world of viral this and viral that and social media, and the more people see that kind of emotion and people, having some kind of a catharsis, that's going to resonate. Maybe it's going to bring more interest and staying power into this situation and keep people's interest. That's the only thing I can think about. This is a very raw moment, but it's always going to be raw when there's this type.
Well, what I'm afraid is that there's really no leader in town who can take the ball and make it work. To kind of, okay, you're going to need programs, you're going to need law enforcement, you're going to have to get some money for this that we might not have currently. But truth be told, who is that? Is it John Danforth? Is it Andy Taylor? Do we bring back Father Biondi? Is it Art McCoy, the school superintendent?
Well, Jimmy Edwards is director of public safety.
And he's a great leader.
He's in that position to do something like this.
Well, Bill, you're a crime czar. Idea.
Right.
Maybe that's the first. We're going to start out by creating a position where, okay, it's on you.
Right.
All right. You make $250,000 a year to settle certain neighborhoods in the city down. All right. And make that one person's responsibility.
The smoke czar, which is, what the city did years and years ago
when
in the
the
30s
air
and 40s.
was so thick.
Made Raymond Tucker smoke czar, said you're in charge of cleaning it up.
I like that idea, but I'll tell you what I would do is I'd make it we have plenty of precedent for city-county cooperation. I think this is everybody's problem. I don't think it's limited. Let me finish.
All right, I disagree.
Okay, well, fine, go ahead and disagree. But we have a major case squad that's city-county. We have Regis, the justice. We share criminal justice information. We share the 911 service city-county. And I think Bill's idea is good, but I think it ought to be a city-county, everybody coming together. It'd be nice if it was all region, but city-county to address this, because this isn't just the city's problem. And yes, it's a block-by-block problem, but it's our problem as a community, and there's plenty of crime in the county. So it's like, I think we should do what you're talking about, but I think it ought to be city-county.
There's plenty of problems throughout. Right. I hear what you're saying, but this is a city problem. This is a problem that is festering throughout the city. And I'm not saying young people don't get killed in all parts of town, okay? But this is a city problem.
But see, that's where I would respectfully ask you to just consider that if it's a city problem, it's rippling out and it is affecting everybody.
It's not. You don't think it's I think it's our problem as a whole region.
That's what I'm saying.
I think it's a cultural problem.
It's a regional problem.
Regional
and again,
it's
every bit as regional as our pride in the Blues, winning the Stanley Cup. And I'm sorry,
you know what?
but
I'll tell you something.
I don't see that, right?
It is a regional problem.
I don't. I mean, like somebody who's living in St. Charles, for instance, who we're always picking on. This isn't their problem.
I think it should be.
No, I think it is, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Because I think with this crime, and when it's on CNN and USA Today and the New York Times and CBS, and it was all this week, that means people aren't going to visit this area. They're not going to move their businesses
and I think
here.
I'm saying morally that don't claim the Blues and the Cardinals if you want to not claim the city. I'm sorry. I just have. We can agree, disagree. I ain't backing down. I think it's our problem as a region.
Well, I would say it's a state problem because.
Well, that's what, and I think we ought to put our money behind it.
It's not going to be solved
in terms of urgency, Ray.
I think your idea. My point is your idea of a czar is a good one, but I think it ought to be done.
Well, my idea of a czar is why the federal judges disinvited me to speak at their luncheon.
Right.
Well, I remember that, yeah.
Well, I've been disinvited to do a lot of things because I say it ought to be a city, county, or regional approach.
But isn't a good start anyway in terms of action and boots on the ground, as much as I hate that expression, having the highway patrol, bringing them back, as Governor Greitens did, for Governor Parson to say, that's on the table. That should be happening right now. If you can free up St. Louis City police officers from anything they're doing on the interstates, and instead
here's the thing, Wendy. I mean, you're so right. But the last time the Highway Patrol was here, as we all know, they generated 5,000 tickets, and they were ripped up. And I think they feel once bitten, twice shy.
Excuse me, but 12 children weren't dying.
By the way, don't forget, the state did say, a couple years ago at the behest of the mayor, gave local control of the police back to the city of St. Louis. And after that, the crime has gone up.
Well, but I think that East-West Gateway Coordinating Council, for example. I don't know all about its charter, but it's a structure, or by state, are structures that we ought to be looking at doing the solutions rather than just looking at them as transportation. I think we need to think as a region on this. I think it's a regional problem that needs regional resources.
It's a national problem.
Well, I understand, but here
But you know
we ought to
what?
deal with it regionally.
In
I just
Chicago,
do.
over 7 years, I believe, there were 1,700 shootings, children being shot. 174, over 7 years, 174 of them died. We are already, I mean, think of, that's 7 years. We're talking about 3 months, and we have 12 dead children already. So, yeah, that's a national problem, but this is our problem.
Well, according to Chief John Hayden, as of last Friday, we have had in the city of St. Louis 1,600 assaults with a deadly weapon. Shootings. So, you know, it's
just like kind of going back to the special session. It's like, yeah, we could get East-West Gateway and the region and sing Kumbaya, but hey, meanwhile, these bullets are flying in certain neighborhoods at certain times, and that's what needs to be addressed.
I'm not addressing that. I'm saying that we need to
exactly
resource.
right. You got to concentrate, because if you get too big, you might collapse under the weight of this massive effort.
Exactly.
So why not concentrate on the shooters in particular neighborhoods in the city of St. Louis?
Right, and I wish
The two
St.
are not
Charles County
mutual.
Well,
cared.
at any
I
time.
wish
Hey,
Jefferson County
Charlie,
cared.
it's not
I
mutually
wish Franklin
exclusive.
County
And
cared. They don't care.
Excuse
And
me.
looking for
It's
that
not
for
that they don't.
salvation is not going to happen.
There's certain problems. It's a cultural thing, and very difficult if somebody would have fixed it already. But you can't. I don't think you can just say, well, St. Charles bears responsibility
I
for
didn't
this.
say
as
that.
much as- I thought you
didn't say
did.
that.
No,
I
he's just
didn't.
saying
I
it's a
said it's
regional-
our, that we, let me repeat. First of all, the ultimate solution is block by block. There's no question about it. That's what I talked about, whether it's community policing, whether it's more neighborhood centers, whether it's those things, that's part of it. And police is part of it. And yes, it's in the city, but the resources should come from all of us to work on this together, just like we do on the Major Case Squad, just like we do with Regis. And I think we ought to use community resources.
I'll go
And
further.
the two
I'll
are
go
not mutually
further.
exclusive.
When we had a tornado in Joplin, was it up to Joplin to fix up the
Right.
city? No, we all jumped in.
Right.
In fact, we jumped in when it came to Puerto Rico and New Orleans, and we're losing a lot of people in this town, and I think that at least the people of Illinois and Missouri, if not beyond, should be involved.
Okay.
I have trouble
I think-
connecting a F5 tornado to a drive-by shooting, but I see what you're saying, I think.
Well, I say treat it like an epidemic, like it is.
I agree, but
The
we're saying the
healthcare
same thing,
epidemic,
except
that's for sure.
when we talked about, for example, like, well, look at this structure of the CVC, the Conventions Explore St. Louis now. County money goes into the city, into the convention center. We don't have any problem with that, and I think it's a good thing we did that. But the point is, the idea of it's just city got to figure it out with your own resources. I think we need, as a community, to deal with this. It is a community-wide issue. I do.
Well, people have been talking about funding Hyperloop at the RCGA, you know? I mean, maybe
This would be a
RCGA
lot
should-
better to fund than that.
Where they at?
Yeah, well, RCGA should focus on
And it can
crime.
involve the business community too. It's not all just public money, but this would be. You talk about leadership. Where's civic progress on this? Where are they?
Well, I think they're gonna be
RCGA, wait a minute,
involved.
What's up?
we're now making the RCGA responsible for law enforcement? I mean, that's kind of, and investigations, I think that's broadening their
Well, how
scope
about
a little
some
bit.
funding of it?
I'm talking about funds.
Oh, okay, all right.
I mean, I'll give you an example. Recently, the loop, the trolley that connects the loop to the History Museum was running out of money, so Bob Clark at Clayco came up with $500,000, all right? Andy Taylor comes up with $30 million to renovate the Soldiers Memorial. Money is given for many different projects, and I think now, if more James Clarks are needed, street intervention teams to go up to the shooters and say, hey, we're going to give you services or we're going to give you jail. I mean, let's hire
No,
them.
I'm with that 100%. I'm just saying, like, but to ask other municipalities from around the region to help solve the problem, like you say, morally, they should do it. But don't waste your breath on that. Let's move on to
I tell you what,
Plan A,
we got
'cause-
county
'cause
money
that's-
helping the Cardinals still.
That's
we
Plan
still
Z.
got money, city, county money going to the kind of state money going to the blue.
And it'll
I'm
triple.
a big fan.
It will triple,
but my
Ray,
point
before
is-
they'll give a dime to the city of
Well,
St.
Well,
Louis.
don't
that's
forget,
what
guys.
I'm
You
arguing
got to
about.
have some kind of sense that something might work. I mean, it's like the war on poverty. You know, we've been fighting that for years and losing it.
Decades.
You know, people are just not willing to say, yes, all right, it's my responsibility here, I'll throw in some money. They need to see some idea that this might work.
How about
And I wish I had the idea.
how about an initiative for more community centers, and we fund that as a community? How about that? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
That would be
Ozzie
a
Smith is
start.
working on a community center right now in
Maybe
North St.
Ozzie
Louis,
Smith
and-
could be the czar that gets by. Everybody loves him. But I mean, I'm saying we
I
could
agree.
do this as a community and not say, well, yeah, but it's, and that doesn't mean it's not block by block, but we should, as a community, own it as much as we proudly own the good things, whether it's the zoo or the arch or the blues or whatever. We ought to own this like we own the good stuff. That's all I'm saying.
Well, if you do consider it our number one issue, and I do.
I do, too.
I think so. Okay, well, let's go to the old mailbag and see what folks had to say about last week's program. Running for county executive would make Tim Fitch the favorite to get the lead role in the Clarence Harmon story. Pretty good, Tim King of Fenton, Missouri. During the most recent episode of Donnybrook, Charlie Brennan pronounced bungee with a soft E. It's pronounced with a hard E. That from Nick Winook of St. Louis, Missouri. And we'll get his letter next week about the pronunciation of his last name. right care of KETC, 3655 Olive Street, St. Louis, Missouri, 63108. Don't forget those emails, letters at ketc.org, and, of course, those tweets. Hashtag DonnybrookSTL. And you can also listen to us on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, and TuneIn, whatever your favorite podcast is. Thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Donnybrook, but now it's our turn to listen to you. So if you'd like to give us a call, we'll hear your comments and questions on your turn, which is coming up in just a matter of moments. Alvin and I have the honor of taking your phone calls tonight. Everybody else sees you next week at this time. Have a great, safe Labor Day. But don't touch that dial.
Donnybrook is made possible by the members of the 9 Network.
Well, Charlie said it at the beginning of the show that this is the last one before Labor Day. So say goodbye to this suit. You won't see it until Memorial Day. I'm one of those sticklers. I know you're not supposed to do it, but I am. So anyway, Alvin Reed, Charlie Brennan. Hey, we're here to talk on your turn, and we're going to start with Diane in Creve Coeur. Hi, Diane. Hi, Diane.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you guys?
We're fine. Go right ahead.
Wonderful show. I have a few things to say. Regarding the issue of the shootings here in the St. Louis area, I have an idea that I think is a fairly good idea, but it can't be talked about. It cannot be advertised. It not be put in the paper. And what I was thinking is cameras put in certain areas to start with.
Mm-hmm.
There was a Wellston market in Wellston where someone got killed, and a few days later there were some people outside they got shot at.
Mm-hmm.
Certain areas, if they had cameras, but you don't talk about it, just do it.
Just do it. I hear what you're saying. I agree. I hear what you're saying, Diane.
Yeah, thanks. You know, we do have cameras in convenience stores and in banks, and I don't know if they're thwarting crime all that much. I mean,
but they might help solving crime.
Oh, in solving crime, yeah.
Yeah, and you're right, but I like Diane's point. Don't even talk about it. Just have them there. Yeah. And if they're there, I know it's Big Brother and people talk about that, but at the same time, got to do something.
They're in downtown St. Louis, they do have quite a few cameras.
All right.
Yeah. Hey, Cliff, you're next. Hi. Cliff and Florissant.
Hello.
Hi.
How y'all doing?
Good.
Just fine.
Okay, yes. I just wanted to say, you know, I work for a public utility. We had 2 men killed, and those men were from rural areas. And it was devastating, you know, going to those funerals. And I would just like to say, you know, I would just like to see the police step up. I mean, yesterday I was in the middle of a car chase at 270 and Lindbergh, and there was another guy running from someone here on 70 and Shreve. And I believe that those are some of the same people that are doing the shootings. And those people are not looking for programs to go to. You know, so they need, you know, those people, the traffic is just like the Wild Wild West out there, and they're driving all over the place. And I think these are some of the same people that are shooting at nighttime.
All right.
They're running around in their cars. Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Cliff.
Thanks. Great call. Thank you very
All
much.
right, let's go to Scott in Sunset Hills. Hi, Scott.
Good evening.
Hi.
First, I want to say I really enjoy listening and watching your program.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I have several comments I would like to make. The first one is in regards to all the shootings. And before we can do anything, we need to identify what the issues and problems are. And one of the issues and one of the problems that we need to address is we have kids raising kids. Number two, it helps tremendously if we have a 2-parent household. Number three, we need to emphasize getting a good education, whether it's college or a trade, but we need to give them an education so they can go ahead and have a future.
I
and
agree.
then the other thing is all right, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean, I said you go ahead. That's all. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. And the other thing is, when we catch the people who are perpetrators of these crimes, we need to be tough on them. We can't cuddle them. Just like this guy that got only 4 years. That's crazy. There's absolutely no reason for that. And then my other comment is in regards to property taxes. My assessment went up by 56%, which is asinine. And I went ahead and contested, and it got knocked down to 39%. Right. There is absolutely no reason or excuse for my assessment to be that high, and that's absolutely atrocious. And we need to do something about it.
Okay. Thank you, sir. James Clark, who I mentioned for Better Family Life, he was on a station a few days ago, and I was listening to him, and one of the things he said point blank, talking to black men, black young men, you need to get married. You need to take care of whoever might be you want to have a baby with in the future or you've already had one with. Family structure, 2 parents, that's what's missing. That's a percentage of all these murders right here, just a family structure. So those of you who want to be, mad at Scott for saying that, oh no, James Clark, Better Family Life, heart of the city, working the streets, says the same thing.
Our next call comes from, Dave in South City. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Fine.
This is Wizard. I met you at Donnybrook a few times.
Oh yeah, sure.
Or Donnybrook.
Yeah,
Right.
thanks.
Yeah, I was just wondering, has anybody heard anything about Curtis Lewa and the Guardian Angels lately? Did they ever develop anything that was effective?
Yeah, I mean, of course, they were on the subways, the Guardian Angels in New York City, and then I think they were here for a very short time.
They were in Washington, D.C. when I was here. When I was here.
But the thing is, they patrol a certain amount of territory, and of course, we've got a wide swath of St. Louis that needs to be patrolled. I don't think they ever patrolled neighborhoods. They were largely on subways, were they not?
And they were on major streets, like in the Washington, D.C. area.
I see, okay.
But they were there. and they were visible. At that time, they had red berets and like red vests. And they didn't carry any guns or anything like that. And maybe times have changed enough that nobody wants to volunteer without a gun. But they were there, and they were a deterrent to crime. So maybe it's something we have to revisit.
Let's see what the tweets have to say.
All right. JDR 1949. Sadly, as long as there are gangs and drugs, there are going to be senseless killings.
And Daniel Pate, I'm sorry, I have to say this. Would the response be different if these kids were white kids attending private schools in the city?
Sarah H.J. Wilt says, Franklin County does care about the senseless violence in St. Louis. Perhaps expanding the conversation would lead to new ideas.
Thank you. And Holy Star 77, seems the St. Louis region's ethos when it comes to crime in the city is not my problem because it's perceived as a poor people's problem. We do need to view these as problems our community collectively must address. It won't change otherwise. Thank you so much for that, and we would sure appreciate more tweets at hashtag DonnybrookSTL.
Absolutely. Let's go to Tom in Maryland Heights. Hi, Tom.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
Hey, I'm just calling in because I was listening to KMOX earlier this week, and they had a man on who had a PhD in this subject matter, and he laid this out in a very academic manner, a scientific academic manner of how you address this problem. And he explained it very thoroughly. And I was wondering if anybody else heard this show early this week.
Some guy I know was in charge of that show.
Yeah, that was a town hall that that you heard on Monday on KMOX that included the police chief and some state representatives and aldermen and 2 pediatric trauma doctors, one from Children's, the other from Cardinal Glennon. But the gentleman you're referring to is Thomas Abt, ABT. He is a former district attorney in New York City, assistant district attorney. He also worked for the Obama Justice Department, but most recently he's been teaching and researching at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and his book is called Bleeding Out. And essentially, he has this program which has worked in places like Oakland, Camden, and in Boston. It combines law enforcement with programs. It approaches individual shooters. It really focuses in on them, not so much on the neighborhoods, but on the individuals right where they are. And he says by implementing this, you could reduce homicides by 50% in 8 years in 40 cities across the United States. I think it's worth a read for all of our listeners. Our listeners and leaders for sure.
Definitely on the leaders. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's Thomas Abt, ABT. The book is called Bleeding Out. Thanks. D is in Dogtown. Thanks for the alliteration, D.
Hi, D.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you doing tonight?
Great.
Good.
I didn't know I was on live. I'm not on live, but
yeah, you are.
Asking like
You're on.
You're live.
You're live.
You are the show.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. You are some of the smartest people I have ever seen in all of this city.
We're not.
I just don't understand. Yes,
he's
and
not.
I just don't understand why everybody's worried about the guns. What are you doing about the ammunition? You doesn't have to go NRA. Just where is the ammunition coming from? Why isn't somebody controlling that? Just get rid of the bullets and let them throw the guns at one another.
There you go.
Of that.
D, this is so funny. My late father had a friend, okay? And he said this like 30 years ago. He said like, hey, all right, you got all these laws about all these guns and all that. He said like, hey, if you can't buy bullets, if you can't walk in to buy bullets, 75% of the guns are now inoperable.
That's right.
You're right. And I've heard this argument for decades, but not widespread, but just individuals say like, outlaw bullets.
This is simple.
Yeah.
This is simple, common sense. You know what? Eventually, you're not going to have the ammunition. Yeah, I'll throw water at you or gas or whatever. But you know what? Get rid of the damn bullets.
Right.
And
Or you could tax them. I don't think you could outlaw them,
but you could tax them. You could do a lot of
I'm
things.
not saying outlaw. I'm saying get control of the ammunition.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Steve.
And I've heard that.
Then,
Thank you, Dee, for the call.
If you're going to put this money up,
Yeah.
now wait a minute. If you're going to put the money up for these people to bring stuff in, have these kids and these families grab the ammunition and bring it back to you guys.
All right.
Thanks, Dee.
Right.
Thank you so
Dee.
much.
But that is true. Like you, me, anybody else could go buy some bullets right now.
Of course.
Right. They wouldn't even ask, do you have a gun? Well, of course you do, but nobody asked. But that's a good call, Dee. Mike and Leslie. Hi, Mike.
Evening, guys.
Hey.
I hope everybody in the TV audience has a good 3-day weekend. I know I plan to.
Here we go.
Now, let's talk about if I was a really, really rich guy and was using a city as kind of like a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd probably buy every vacant house, turn it into green land, green pasture, and maybe even build a few grade schools.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe buy a couple million guns back. I wouldn't go around, trying to change laws. But that's just me if I was a really, really rich guy.
Who's the really, really rich guy we're talking about here, Mike?
Oh, I don't have any idea. Just suppose there was a rich guy.
I agree.
Thought St. Louis was a hobby.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that kind of, with some variations, that's what happened in Detroit with the Dan from Quicken Loans.
Yes, right.
What's his name? Dan? I'll think of it. But apparently the owner of Quicken Loans, or the founder, has really revitalized Detroit almost single-handedly.
Right. And who was the first person to talk about that in St. Louis?
I remember you talking about
that.
You wanted farmland, though. He's doing
or just like tear stuff down and then figure out what to do with it. But exactly right. Thank you, Mike.
Hey, Mark in Spanish Lake. Hi.
Yes. We need to repeal these laws allowing people to carry guns in public unless they have a concealed carry license.
I like that.
I agree.
We used to have that.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
As a matter of fact, Johns Hopkins University took a look at the repeal of that law and concluded that that's when the homicides started to spike.
There we go.
Yeah.
Got factual evidence. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much.
All right, Jordan in Alhambra. And Jordan, I always ask if it's a town or a city that I don't know where it's at. Where are you at, Jordan, in Alhambra?
It's a village.
All right, the village of Alhambra.
Northeastern Madison County.
All right.
It's pronounced Alhambra.
All right, Alhambra.
Emphasis on the ham, I'll tell you that.
All right, Jordan. All right, go right ahead, sir.
On a serious note, on the child murders in St. Louis, several years ago I visited my parents in Florida, and I was ashamed to say that I was from Illinois because Governor Blagojevich was being arrested at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said I was from St. Louis, but now I'm ashamed to say I'm from St. Louis.
Oh, boy.
Even though I was educated there at Chaminade, and I'm very proud of that, but doggone, it's shameful and intolerable that these murders are ongoing. And we must all reread the Second Amendment and really look at what it says. I see nothing about a well-regulated militia with all the gunplay in St. Louis. I spent the previous Friday at Ballpark Village, and I was afraid for my life coming back to my car because of all the happenings and outstanding crimes that are going around that area.
All right, I hear you, Jordan. Thank you, sir. I'll share the story. When I went to school at the University of Kansas, and I was there late 70s to early 80s, we had no problem addressing the back and forth between Kansas City and St. Louis. We were better. We were safer. This was a better place to live. If I were going to college now, I'd keep my mouth shut.
Well, I'll tell you what, and now I'm told that in Kansas City, a lot of people are wearing the I Love Kansas City t-shirts, which is, you don't see a lot of those in St. Louis now. I mean, let's face it, we have some challenges.
Right.
That was a very interesting call. Thanks for calling.
And it's not impossible, but we're in a bad place right now.
Oh, New York was in terrible shape with the homicides they had years ago.
Exactly.
And they found a way to get out of it. Now New York's one of the safest cities in the world.
Hit it right.
Hey, Dave in Defiance. Hello and good evening.
Hi, Dave.
Good evening, gentlemen. Hi. It's a nice show tonight.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment about the gun violence in St. Louis. It's going to take the good people of St. Louis to wake up. I believe that they know a lot of the people and the thugs that are doing these problems, and they need to handle business and take care of them one by one and so that they could ask themselves, well, where's the guy that's causing the problem? Well, all of a sudden he disappeared, and if enough of them disappear, I think the problem will disappear along with it.
All right. Thank you, Dave. And look, vigilante justice is not a good thing, but I grew up in a time where we had these movies, Shaft and Superfly and all that, and people said, like, somebody decided that this was bad. This was a bad image to put out there. And I'm not saying it was good, but what a lot of those movies centered around was the community taking care of itself. Now, I'm not saying go out and murder people in cold blood or whatever, but at the same time, band together, point them out, rat them out, get them arrested, get them off the street. And if they get back out and you see them again, do the same thing over again. And that's the way, that's part of it. It won't be the entire solution, but that's part of it.
Here's the thing, though. You know, you have to have a certain trust in the effective prosecution of the person who's arrested. And Mary Pat Carl, a former prosecutor in the city, had a guest column in today's Post-Dispatch where she said that of the murder cases that the circuit attorney brings to court, she's only winning 2 out of 10. I don't know if her figures are accurate, but that seems really low. And you know, you can't. Can you imagine, like, being the snitch? I hate that word, but okay. So you're a witness to a crime, and then the person that you bring to the authorities is found to be innocent, even though you know the person did the crime. It's complicated. I'll put it that way.
Very complicated, right? And I got my questions about that article and as to who actually wrote it, but anyway, let's go to Sharon in South County. Hi, Sharon.
Oh, hi. I'm just kind of, I understand. I feel terrible about these kids getting killed, but what's a 15-year-old child on Saturday night walking home from his girlfriend's house at 3:30 in the morning? This is what disturbs me. You know, people need to be looking out for your kids.
No, Sharon, I agree with you, but let me ask you this. You live in South County. If a kid were walking home at 3:30 in the morning, would you even fathom them being shot?
Well, you know what? I lived in the city many times, but it's like you have to take care of your kids. You have to look out for your kids.
Yeah.
Okay, and I agree. It depends on where you live. I agree, but I hear you.
And some kids, though, are young and they're shot on their porch or in front of a restaurant or at a football game or while they're playing in their own backyard. So not all of them are 15 at 3:30 in the morning.
Agreed.
Hey, Dan in South St. Louis, thanks for joining us. I think you're South St. Louis. Hi, Dan.
There you go. You talk about the state patrol coming in, and are they just taking care of the highways, or I thought they were coming in and taking care of the city?
This would be the highways.
Oh, so it's not really they're coming in and doing policing stuff.
No.
They're just doing highways.
They're doing highways, and that would free city police officers to patrol the city.
Okay, I understand that. Okay, I always thought they were coming in and doing the city, but okay, good.
No, that might be the next step, but for now they're just going to patrol the highways. All right, Judy in South County. How you doing, Judy?
Hi.
Hi there.
Enjoyed your show.
Thank you.
We enjoyed your show. We were wondering, what prevents us from having 2 separate laws, one for the city gun and one for rural with their guns?
That's actually the proposal by Lacey Clay, who was on my program the other day, and he said, look, the city of St. Louis needs certain gun laws that maybe Penobscot County does not. And I think he's got a point there. And so do you. Thank you. All right. Yeah, so Clay has introduced the legislation to that effect.
So hopefully that'll work out. Michael in Afton. Hi, Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I believe that the city leaders and all that are turning a blind eye to all this violence and stuff. And short of martial law, you'll never get rid of it. You know, all these drive-bys, they need checkpoints and stuff to make sure that they're not carrying all these weapons and stuff.
All right.
That's all I have to say.
All right. And Michael, to a degree, I agree with you. I've said before, like, hey, if you're going to actually do this, go to the people of the neighborhood and say, like, hey, every 2 blocks, you know, if there were police there and whatnot, and you had the law within your hand, like I say, checkpoints, just like they say DWI and whatnot, where you're checking licenses and license plates and things like that. You could say this is infringement upon people's rights, but if the people who are in these neighborhoods don't feel safe, and this is the only way they can feel safe, it has to be addressed. It has to be addressed.
Well, that is a pretty bold proposal.
Not martial law, don't get me wrong.
I don't think it's been used in a lot of the cities that have seen crime diminish. But, you know, what you're essentially saying is that the neighborhood should be treated kind of like the airport, where people have to kind of get wanded or scanned or frisked or whatever. And I guess we'll have to debate that. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael.
Hey, Ed, Jeff County, thanks for weighing in. What's on your mind, Ed?
Yes, 2 quick things. One is on one of the previous talkers said something about bullets. How about if for every bullet that you buy, you have to have a spent casing to return to get a bullet?
All right, There we go. Because that means you were target shooting. Now, I don't know about deer hunting and all that. That might be impossible, but I hear what you're saying.
The other thing is, if you want to bring National Guard in, bring them in, the engineers, to tear down the old existing buildings.
Another good idea. Another tremendous idea. Absolutely. Thanks, Ed. Dan in St. Louis. Hi, Dan.
Well, hello. You guys are having a good show tonight.
Thank you.
A lot of good feedback from people on your turn. I wanted to say that I kind of think Bill McClellan was pretty close to the truth when he was talking about a cultural kind of a thing, because we live in a culture of war. You know, there's war on crime, war on poverty, war on drugs. And when you stop and take a look at these individuals that are doing the shooting, both individually and in a mass sense, you can really kind of look at them and see that they're at war. You know, they're warriors of a sense. And I kind of look and think, you know, most people move on beyond that kind of a thing. But I think at the really basic level of it all, that's what we have to change. We have to change the culture of war that we live in.
Thank you so much.
That's all I want to say.
Oh my gosh, thank you, Dan. That was I couldn't have stated that better than you did. You should be on the show.
Well, definitely a violent culture. I don't know if it's war, but
it's violent. Right,
yeah.
That's right. That's what he's saying.
Dell in Lake St. Louis. Hi.
Hey, Ray, Alvin, thanks very much for taking my call. I'm calling in to tell you about a grant that's been provided and offered to the City of St. Louis. It's worth $2.2 million, and it's for wide area aerial observation, otherwise known as surveillance. It tracks people, cars, buildings using pixels. So people are not identified by race or gender, but if one pixel stops at another pixel, which is another person, and that second pixel winds up dead, and there's a shot spotter that locates the GPS to that location, then this technology can coordinate with the police to follow that pixel until it's apprehended. And this has been used in Baltimore, Juarez, Mexico, and Compton.
Okay. Well, is it done by drone or helicopter, or how do you get the aerial surveillance?
It's done by a Cessna aircraft that's got 32 square miles of visual field from an altitude of 10,000 feet.
All right.
It was introduced in Baltimore.
And we're getting this, are we not?
No, we're not getting it. It hasn't been approved. It's been offered to the city. The city has not moved forward with it. I think that what needs to occur, it seems to me, is that the ground roots, the grassroots has got to embrace this and say, yes, we're willing to have this kind of observation of our community, knowing that it will be used properly and there will be oversight for that technology, and
All right.
people will use it
Fascinating.
properly.
Oh, fascinating. Del, share that with KMOX. Share that with KTC. Send us something. Hey, this is why we exist. A great first show, and this one was absolutely marvelous. Don't you agree, Charlie?
Very much so.
All right, see you guys next week.